Sometimes when you have an encounter at a young age, these things have a tendency to follow you for the rest of your life. And that's exactly what happened to tonight's guest. She had a Dogman encounter as a very young child, and her whole life has been marked by these creatures. We're going to get into every single encounter. You don't want to miss it. She's from New York. What an incredible encounter that she has had. But before any of that, I just want to say thank you for being here. I appreciate you so very much. If you had an encounter, you can always email me at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Let's jump right into this encounter.
Well, my name is Shannon, and I grew up and was born and raised here in upstate New York. And beautiful place. Like I said, we usually preface upstate, downstate, because upstate is very rural, or most people think you're from the city when you say New York. So where I grew up is Otsego County, and I was born in this town, more of a hamlet, tiny, rinky-dink town, and that's kind of where it all began. About 1988, so that would have put me at 5 years old. And I remember I had just started kindergarten and I was sick, and my mom had put me out on the couch, and the couch faced the front wall. To my left, where my head was, would have been my parents' bedroom. Directly across from me would have been my bedroom, then the stairwell, and then the kitchen. Because in most old country homes, like the living room or the main room, all the rooms were off of it. So if you were in the living room, you could see the house, basically. So I remember I was laying there and everyone had gone to sleep, and I was looking into my bedroom. And even in the country, when you have a street light, I mean, it's still quite dark. You get some illumination, but not a ton. But I do remember the street light kind of coming in through the window. And as I'm looking into where my bedroom was, it got dark, real dark in the bedroom. And in that darkness, I started seeing something move. And I sat there and stared at it for a while, and then it formed. And when I say it formed, I was 5 at the time. It was almost like it just came out of nowhere. And I saw, like in the door frame, first I saw a snout come out from the side. And as I'm watching this, it turned its head and was now facing me. And what I was looking at was what I would call a dog. Now that I'm older, more wolf-like, huge. The head was massive. The ears were tall. They were pointy, black. But I remember seeing like a smoke gray color within the fur. I don't want to say like a mane, but you know how like a fluffy dog has a lot of hair right here, but there was some smoke color in it. Its teeth were almost looked too big for its mouth. It wasn't sneering or had a raised lip. It just looked like its teeth were too big for its mouth, so you could see them all. And the thing that scared me the most were the eyes, because as it turned and looked at me, there were orange yellow eyes, and they were huge. And it made no sound, and there was no body. It was a head, just the head of this big wolf dog looking creature. And it didn't float like how you would think a ghost would float, or it just stayed steady and streamlined and was moving towards me. It made it probably just past my door frame into the living room where I was, and my capacity for survival at 5 wasn't great. So I just remember grabbing the covers and throwing them over my head and closing my eyes. And that's how I stayed till the morning time. It never made a sound. I didn't hear it come near me. I didn't hear breathing. It just, I don't know what happened to it. For the life of me, I don't know why I didn't yell and scream for my father or my mother. Um, I just, I don't know if my brain at that age could figure out what I was looking at. So I just decided maybe it wasn't real, but I know it was real because it stuck with me my entire life. And that was the first time I had experienced something like that. Um, Fast forward to a couple years later, that would have put me at about 7, so 1990. Um, we often went to my grandmother's house, and because my grandfather had passed away relatively early to cancer. So my grandma loved having my sisters and I come over and kind of fill up her time, especially on the weekends, and in the summer we were there all the time. And I think I mentioned in my email, my grandma was like the best human being on the face of the planet. She was such a godly woman. She was a pillar, and she was a prayer warrior, and just loyal, loyal, loyal. And going to her house was a treat, to say the least. It was very safe. It was the calm in every storm, really, because growing up, our household was a bit tumultuous. So going to grandma's was just wonderful. And I say that because I have to put her on blast. She was just an amazing woman. This one summer, and it had to have been about July because it was hot and it was muggy. And I am not a nature girl. I mean, I grew up in the country, but I didn't care to be in it. I didn't want to get dirty. I didn't want to get hot. I didn't want to get bug bites. I would have much rather been inside, cool and doing whatever. But uh, in the late 80s, early 90s, you were outside. That's just what you did. You didn't stay inside. So um, this particular day, I decided if I have to be outside, I'm going to go where it's cool. And in the far right corner of my grandma's property, there was an old calf shed that my grandfather had built, and it was long since decommissioned. And they had turned it into a playhouse for us. And it was nothing extravagant. It had a cement floor and some cement sides and some wood, and it was a nice little outbuilding. But they turned it into a playhouse for the cousins and I. So I decided I'm going to go in there and I'm going to play. And I did that often, and often by myself because I'm the youngest, and my 2 older sisters were always together. So I kind of was a loner. And that day I went in and was playing around, playing pretend, and I distinctly remember feeling uncomfortable. Started feeling scared, I guess, different. And I kept having this feeling like I needed to look out the window. And I didn't want to look out the window, but I kept feeling like I needed to. And so I walked over to the window, and about 150 feet from my grandma's back door was woods, the thick woods, because she lived in the country also. And I looked out the window and I'm looking at the wood line, and I didn't see anything. And I'd been in those woods before with her and my sisters, and but I had never gone in there alone, and nor did I ever have a desire to go on my own because I was a chicken, and I I knew I couldn't go in there alone. I was too young. Um, but this day, I apparently got brave, and I said, "I'm going to go in the woods." And I was a bit rebellious as a kid, and so I left the playhouse, and I remember looking to my left where my grandma's house was to make sure no one was outside, no one could see me, walking into the woods. And I did just that. I walked up the little hill right to the wood line, and I walked in. And I'm not kidding you, Josh. It was as if the woods swallowed me up. It was immediately dark, cold, which was quite the contrast from what it was outside. And I know the woods can be a couple degrees cooler, but I mean, it was cold and it was dark. And I don't know why I didn't turn back then, but I kept walking. And I remember For some reason, I have this in my head. I had these little white Ked shoes on, and I was kicking the pine litter and looking at the pine cones, but always keeping my eye on the wood line, just in case I had to exit stage left quickly, or if I heard my grandmother, I could be out of the woods quick. But I had wandered quite a ways in, and maybe 5, 10 minutes in, I got that feeling that something was off, that something was there, uncomfortable. And I heard a voice, and it said, leave. Now, in my head, I could not tell where it was coming from. It just sounded there. Didn't sound left, right, front, center, just there. And it said it again, but it said, leave now. And I froze. My first thought was, oh my gosh, my dad's here for some reason. But then I realized this wasn't my dad's voice. Um, it was manly, I would say. It was gruff. It was big, and the tone of it was very sharp and matter of fact almost. And now that I'm an adult and I'm a mother, I can equate it to when your child has like kind of pushed your last button and you're giving them that final warning of straighten up. I've told you for the last time. That's what it felt like. That's what it sounded like. Like something was telling me, leave now or else, you know. Uh, Fear, complete fear went through me because I think in my spirit I knew something was wrong. And within a few seconds of that, kind of just standing there processing, what do I do with this? Where do I go? Do I run? It was as if the canopy of the woods opened up and this gorgeous golden sunshine just splashed down right on me, in front of me. And I remember immediately feeling okay, safe, almost like I knew this was God. I knew this was something okay. Because the fear that I had felt 0.5 seconds ago and the terror that someone's in here with me was gone. And I walked, started walking, and that sunlight stayed right with me until I left the woods. And I left the woods and I walked back down to my grandma's house. I didn't say a word. Um, Not out of fear that, they wouldn't believe me, but I was still young and it was more a fear of I shouldn't have been in the woods, and I don't want to admit that I was in the woods and then get in trouble and then have my parent or have my sisters, tattle to my parents, and I'd get in even worse trouble. So um, I didn't say anything. Uh, that was what I thought, you know, um, well, I should say that was like the last experience I had as a child with anything of that cryptid nature um, until 2006, which would have put me in my 20s. And at that time, my grandmother, oh, okay. So you want me to keep going with my story? Okay. 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 Um, so at that time, I was in my 20s, and my grandmother had developed Alzheimer's, and she was in the late stages of it. And where I was in this point in my life, um, I was able to move in with her as well as my mom, because my mom had divorced my father. So my mom and I decided, and it would probably be better than putting her in a home. We didn't want to do that. We would just live there and take care of her until God called her home. So after after she had passed, my mom moved out, and I decided to stay there and kind of maintain the house until the will could be sorted out and the house would be sold. And so I was staying there, and it was me and my dog. And my dog, Nova, and I mention this because it's important. She was German Shepherd Pit Bull. She was huge, 110 pounds, alpha female to the max, afraid of nothing. You know, she was a guard dog. And so I felt comfortable staying there by myself. And like I said, nothing had happened since 1990. So I wasn't afraid, and I wasn't going back in the woods. So I figured I had nothing to worry about. One evening, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, I had him over to have dinner and watch a movie and hang out. And we did. And then after, it was probably about 10 o'clock at night, he was getting ready to go. So I put Nova on the leash, and we walked him, down the porch and down to the driveway. And I said to my husband, or Jim, I said, "Hey, you want to see the inside of my grandpa's garage?" Um, he's a typical guy, loves to fix and tinker, and he's like, "Yeah, sure." So we went in, and my grandmother's garage was a 2-bay garage, so it had like the 2-bay doors that come down in the front that face the road, and then there was a there was a right side door and a left side door, and we walked into the right side door, me and the dog and him, and showing him around. And in there maybe a minute or two, and out of nowhere, it sounded like a freight train smacked the front of one of those bay doors of the garage. And I mean, it shook the garage, it shook, you could see the vibration of the door. We all jumped. The dog's at attention, and I look at Jim, and I'm like, what was that? And he kind of does this to me. 'Cause my husband is former military, and uh, afraid of nothing really. And so he motioned like this to me, and he starts walking towards the first bay door. And just as he leans in like this to put his ear to it, again, bam! I mean, just this, and it sounded like, it didn't sound like a kick. It was it sounded like an open hand slap against metal. Well, that flung him back like this, and before I know it, he bolts. I mean, he bolts outside. He's now in warrior mode. He bolts out the right side door, and he does a perimeter sweep. He goes around, and he comes back, and he's like, "There's nothing there." And mind you, my grandmother lives in the country. It's 10 o'clock at night. If there's kids out there, you're going to hear them. You're going to, and the likelihood that, that anyone's out there was slim, and it was not windy. It was not storming. Um, so we stood there and kind of befuddled, trying to figure out what was going on. And then my dog Nova turns to the left side door, and she just goes at complete attention, and her hair went up from the top of her head all the way down to her tail, and she's in that stance, where they just freeze. And she began to growl, a growl I had never heard before. It was quiet, but it was deep and low and just consistent. And I looked at my husband, and I said, "It's at that door." And being my husband, who he is, I want to say he had something in his hand at this time. I don't remember what it was, but without reservation, he just went right to that door, and he opened it, and he whipped it open, ready to go. Nothing, nothing. And once my dog saw that there was no one there, she settled down, and he took her by the leash, and he went out that door, and he perimeter walked again. And nothing, no tracks, no smell. My dog wasn't even picking up on anything. It was just as if something vanished. So, needless to say, Um, my husband at the time said, "Are you going to be okay here tonight?" And I said, "No, I'm not. Um, will you please stay?" So he stayed that night, and that was my last experience that I had at my grandmother's house, which still leaves me with a lot of questions. Was this the same thing that didn't want me in the woods that day? Why did it wait so long to appear again? From 1990 to 2006, 16 years. I think I mentioned too, like, was it because there was an alpha male around? My husband? I don't know. I have no idea. But that was my last experience there. Fast forward to 2011. Um, my Jim and I had split ways at that time because we were still boyfriend and girlfriend. And I had gotten a new job and I was looking for a new apartment. And full disclosure, I mean, it was not the best time of my life. I was, mid 20s, hot mess. Didn't know where I was going, what I was doing, just trying to make it. And I needed an apartment and I needed it now. And so I found an apartment in the next county over, which this apartment was a large house on a mountain that the landlord lived at the bottom, and he had converted the attic to an apartment. And there was about 200 feet up from that house was another big building of his where he had a couple other apartments where some other people lived. But I mean, to get to this apartment, you were in God's country, and the driveway up to this house was like a dirt road, and it was about the length of a dirt road, and there was woods on either side. So I didn't like it from the get-go, but I had no choice. So, I had me and Nova, and I think I had my cat at the time. We moved in, and it was probably late summer. About a month into being there, I had gone outside. It was nighttime, and I had gone outside to sit on the porch because I had to walk up some really steep steps because it was an attic apartment. And then they had made this really, really nice deck. And I was out on that deck. And while I was out there, I was listening to the sounds. And like I said, I'm not a nature girl, but I know sounds because and it was beautiful. And the peepers were still going, and you could hear the crickets and just the noise. And all of a sudden, dead silent. Everything went silent. And that perks your interest and gives you that weird feeling. And I thought, well, I know well enough that when the woods go silent, that there's probably a bear, could be a cougar, could be a mountain lion. We have them. I had seen cat tracks all up there. Not a thought. I was like, well, I'm glad I'm up here on the deck. I'm not down on the ground level. A few seconds later, in front of me, because this place, like I said, was on a mountain, so we are just surrounded by trees. Directly in front of me, I hear a classic whoop, and it was like whoop, like that, but big, 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 big. And a few seconds later, behind me, responds the same exact whoop. And I thought to myself, I don't think that's typical animal behavior. And it feels wrong, probably is wrong. That happened, that call and response happened a total of 3 times. And I said, okay, I got you. I'm going back inside. And that's what I did. And I had told my sister about it, and she had come up a few weeks after that to visit me. We were out on the porch, and we weren't really even thinking about it or talking about it. We were just in casual conversation. I think she was getting ready to leave. And again, the woods went completely silent. And I looked at her. I'm like, it's happening. And she's, what? I said, listen, listen, you're going to hear it. As sure as anything, right on cue. Whoop, these really big whoops from one side of the mountain or to the back of me, to the front of me. And of course, she looks at me and she's like, oh, well, that's odd. Yeah, yeah. This is my reality, wonderful. Um, so that was my first encounter. And so after that, I had kind of affectionately, or I should say unaffectionately, dubbed it Sasquatch Mountain. And so that was, like I said, late summer, early fall. Um, my next encounter, so this had to have been maybe October, November. Um, I had gotten home from work and did my normal routine, and the dog had to go outside. And because it was getting towards winter, it got darker earlier. And so I put her on her leash and we go down the stairs, and it's dark. And I usually would take her from the house. You had to cross over the driveway into a big patch of yard that it butted right up to the wood line, but there was like really tall brush before you hit the woods. And I would just take her there to go to the bathroom because it was out of the way. And I didn't like taking her over there, but I figured, well, she's a big girl. If anything happens, I can just let her loose and she'll take care of it. Um, that night, I walked her over there and I'm waiting for her to go to the bathroom. And she whips her head to the left and is looking into the wood line or the tall brush that's standing there. And then I saw her do something I had never seen her do in my entire life, and it still freaks me out to this day. She stood up on her hind legs, and she was a huge dog, and which made her almost as tall as me. She stood up on her hind legs, facing the woods and just staring. And I stood there, and I about 4 or 5 seconds, and I said to her, I said, Nova, you okay? As soon as I said that, she dropped down, tail between her legs, and she bolted as fast as she could. The leash was still around my wrist. So when she bolted, I went down and I got her leash off me. And when I did, I mean, she could have cared less if I was there or not. She ran up back to the house and was by the door. So I'm getting myself up off the ground, and I thought to myself, if this is a bear or something, I'm not going to run because I don't need to be on the menu tonight and I don't want to get attacked. So I'm going to walk purposefully. And so I did. I started to walk, and the whole time I'm saying, oh, Father, please don't let me get ambushed. Please don't let me get eaten. Because at this point I'm thinking animal, just a big predator. Um, so I got up to my apartment, and I'm kind of veering over my left just to make sure nothing is walking. And I didn't see anything. So I got up into my apartment and got my dog calmed down. She was upset. I thought to myself, what the heck did she see? So I grabbed my little flashlight and I went over to my living room window that looked down to where I was with the dog. And as I'm shining and I'm doing this, right where I was standing, right there, were these huge, glowing orange yellow eyes. And they were, I would say, because like I said, I was looking down, and these eyes were not near the ground at all. It had to have been about 7 feet or so in the tall brush where we had just been. And it was as if my flashlight light absorbed it, because I couldn't see ears. I couldn't see um, shape. I just saw something huge and black with eyes. What was the most disconcerting part about it is that this thing was looking up at me, almost almost as if it knew I was going to be looking at it. Um, and I won't lie to you, I felt almost like it was anticipating me to look at it. And it didn't hit me at that point, but it did later on that those are the same eyes I saw in 1988 as a 5-year-old girl. And I remember closing my shades and I sat there on my chair and I just started to pray. And I said, Father, put your angel armies around my house or my apartment and please get me out of here because I don't want to live here anymore. So that was that. And then after that, strangely enough, is when crazy stuff started happening inside my apartment. Um, I know I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I grew up in a Christian home, and we knew that evil existed along with the good. And I experienced probably way more supernatural activity than probably most people should. And we're not, like I said, it's not Casper the Friendly Ghost stuff. This was things that will give you nightmares and things that were not of God. So I was not surprised when things started happening in this apartment. The biggest thing I can think is when I came home one day after work, I had a hair straightener that I would always wind the cord up and put it inside the drawer in the bathroom. When I came home, the straightener was in the middle of my floor, completely stretched out, tip to tail, perfect in a line. And like I said, I had a dog and a cat. They couldn't have done that. It just wouldn't have happened. And then after that, again, after that sighting, I came down with a lot of different illnesses that appeared out of nowhere that they couldn't figure out. Um, I mean, sick, hospitalized, just really sick. Um, and I think it had a lot to do with whatever that was that I saw, Dogman or not. I'm not sure. Um, but then the last encounter I had that I'll end with today was still at this same apartment. And this was winter because I remember we had gotten a lot of snow and it was a Saturday because I was going out to clean my car off so I could go to the store. And I walked out onto the deck and just meandering. And I looked to the left where one of the like really large hills were. And the hill was a while, maybe 2 miles away. I mean, it was quite a distance. And I saw something caught my eye and I looked and there was this huge, all black figure walking on 2 legs, upright, walking up the mountain. And I stopped and I thought, no, 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 come on, no, no, no. And I'm like looking for a differentiation in color. Is there I'm looking for a colored coat or a snowsuit or a snowmobile suit, anything. And that's really what was throwing me off is this thing was all one color. It was massive. It was forward and its arms did the typical really long like swing when it walked. And the speed to which it was walking up this terrain, this mountain was beyond human capacity, I would think. Um, and I remember thinking, I shouldn't see this much of this thing this far away. This thing had to have been huge. And I stood there and I don't think it knew I was there. I don't think it knew I was watching. And it just walked up and to where I couldn't see it behind the trees and it was gone. And that was about all I could take. And within the month, um, my now husband, then boyfriend, had reconciled. And I said, you know, we need, let's get married. So we got married. that really wasn't, it wasn't the only reason, but we knew well enough after being with each other for years, like, all right, this is a good catalyst. Let's get married. And within the month, I was out, and I never looked back.
A lot of times you hear about people having lifelong experiences. I've had lifelong experiences, and it's really interesting to me that your stuff started at 5. That's when my stuff started. My dad had a UFO encounter when I was 5 years old. I was in the car, but I don't even like to use the word tagged. But do you think that's kind of what goes on once you've experienced these things? Like they just kind of are drawn to you? What's your thoughts on that?
One of the conclusions I've drawn over the years is that my experiences, especially, and I speak for myself, seem amplified due to emotional environments and stuff like that. I think these things showed up, like I said, when I was sick or when there was trauma, and not in a good place, just vulnerable. I do believe that you can be more susceptible to these things. I think that's a God-given gift, and I think they know that, and I think that they use that to create doubt and chaos and fear and deceit in you to keep you from doing what God would want you to do, just to put you in a real bad headspace. And I think they start young, because if they can get you young, they can hopefully have you ruined by adulthood.
That's a real good point. I agree with what you're saying with that. And I do think that you had a Dogman encounter. That's exactly what I think that thing was. And it's very strange to me that those are the same eyes that you saw all those years later. I had a gentleman on the show. His name was Will. He was a kid, and he described, the story was is he felt like he needed to look outside, kind of what you described, a lot of the same behaviors. And when he saw this thing, he said his eyes just locked onto these eyes, and he never could forget the eyes as a kid. And I think they do try to tag you and I call them fear eaters is what I call them. And they have a tendency to follow people for a long time. I'm glad that you had your faith, but I do think that they are tied to trauma, places and things like that. Going to your grandmother's property, and I do want to get into your first encounter, but going to your grandmother's property, do you know if there were any graveyards close by or anything like that at all?
Right up the road. Was the main one, but living in the country, there's always abandoned ones, family plots that, overgrown, but there was a main one just up the road. And then also across the hollow, there was one.
I still scratch my head with that, trying to figure out why that is, but they do have a tendency to hang out close to graveyards. I can't even tell you the amount of guests that I've talked to that have had these encounters, and there was a graveyard up the road. With my own personal encounter, there was a graveyard not far. Oddly enough, it was a pet cemetery, which was really strange to me. I don't know that I've ever heard that before, but your very first encounter, it's got to be extremely terrifying as a 5-year-old kid. But did you sit on that, or did you tell anybody what had happened later on?
I believe I sat on it, and as an adult, I remember mentioning it, and I kind of got the feeling like fever dream. You were sick. You had a fever dream, which you can almost accept, especially from a 5-year-old, but it wasn't, because I know what I saw. And I was awake, and the fear that I felt, it never left.
No, and it doesn't leave. And I talk to people every day that have these encounters, and people always try to come with an excuse as to why it's not real or what it could be. But you know what you saw, and when you've experienced it, you can't. Nobody can take that from you. Even at 5 years old, that kind of stuff stays ingrained in your mind. How far were you from where you had your first encounter to your grandmother's house? Was that very far?
No, it was about a half hour. Still in this is the next, maybe two towns over, but it's still in the same county.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I think these things tend to stay, Dogman especially, I think they kind of tend to stay in specific areas, very territorial. And if you look at a lot of these encounters, they're tied to places where a lot of bad things happen. I know that we're really close to the Trail of Tears, kind of close to where I had my encounter at. So, there's just a lot of that stuff that goes on. And, as a kid, having those encounters and then having that encounter on what you call Sasquatch Mountain, which is completely fitting, with all that happening to you, how did that shape your adulthood, your life? How did that affect you?
I think as a kid, I was, I think it made me even more afraid of being outside, going in the woods. I still have yet to go into the woods. Um, I plan on changing that this summer, but um, as a kid, I think you have this resilience, this innocent resilience that you just keep going. You just kind of accept things as they are. So my encounters as a kid definitely scared me, but it really wasn't until my adulthood that when I started putting the pieces together that I realized what they were, but I wasn't afraid anymore, um, because of of who I am in God. And like I explain it, it's almost like this holy anger that you feel when you realize, hey, I'm a daughter of the King. How dare you? That's it's like this holy anger rises up inside you, and I will say, as an adult, since I've been married and have a family, I have yet to really encounter anything like that again. And my home sits next to a creek and woods. Um, and I have not encountered anything. Do I go outside a lot alone? No. At night? No. Because it's still there. But I think if something were to encounter me again, I'd be ready. I'd be ready.
I can relate to that. I remember after I had my Dogman encounter, in the moment, like I didn't stop and pray. I didn't anything. I knew I was fine because I knew who I was, right? And this thing, used mind speak, which is very intriguing to me. How with Dogman you generally get mind speak almost without fail. Like there's graveyards, mind speak, strange eyes. Like those are kind of the things, and they thrive off of fear. But I remember being very angry at it, very angry at myself because I didn't stand up and just rebuke this thing. And I wish I'd have done that. I don't know why that wasn't my first instinct. I think my cop instincts took over and I just did what I felt like I needed to do. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to that. There's a lot of strangeness to these things. And it's, I don't think we'll ever get the answers, but you know who you are and they know who you are. They understand who you are. And once you realize that it does make you angry because it's like, how dare you mess with me like that? But, with those encounters, those things happening to you and experiencing all of that, and I'm pretty sure I think I know where you're going to go with this, but what do you think these things are? Number one, what's your thoughts on that?
It's so hard because when you listen to some people's Bigfoot encounters, they're they're benevolent. They're like, oh, they handed me this. So there's some confusion there, but I know that when I'm confused, I definitely say, hey, God, what's this about? And in Colossians, it says, that all things in heaven and earth were created by him and through him, both visible and invisible. Um, but he also made his creations with free will. So I sometimes, I really do think that they are more spiritual than material. Um, I don't necessarily think it's a primate. I don't necessarily think I think it's a spirit that has taken on the form of. Um, and that form is to, I think, ultimately, like I said, cause fear and chaos and doubt and deceit. I think possibly some of them disguise themselves as benevolent to kind of lure you into a complacency almost and be distracted from maybe a more like sinister intention. Um, that's kind of how I feel because there's so many different stories that you hear. But um, one thing that I've learned is that because we have such an awesome God, he plans ahead. And in First John 4:1, I believe it talks. John was speaking to the church, and he says, "Do not believe every spirit, but test that spirit to see whether it is from God." And that resonates with me because that's like what you said, rebuking it. And 9 out of 10 times, whether it's Bigfoot, Dogman, Skinwalker, Rake, Soon as Jesus comes out of your mouth, it's gone. That's usually a surefire way to say, yeah, you weren't who you said you were.
Spot on. I agree with what you're saying. It's astounding to me. Maybe it shouldn't be, but the amount of time that people invoke the name of Jesus with these creatures and they just leave. They vanish. They leave. What's astounding to me is the matter of fact that the amount of times that comes up, right? A lot on my channel, and it's a huge pattern. And we know that there's power in that name, and we understand like that. That's definitely what you need to do in that situation. And I think the truest statement I've ever come up with is, and I say it a lot, is when they're flesh and blood, they're flesh and blood, and when they're not, they're not. I think that they are kind of can be either or whatever. It's so strange. I don't know that we'll ever get the answers, but I like to hear what people's thoughts are and their opinions on that, because we're taking educated guesses. But I'm like you, I look at things biblically, and it has to fit in that box to me to make sense. And, I wish more people would talk about it like that. But, going back to this, and I'm just going to call it a Dogman encounter that you had on this property. When you saw this thing and you saw the eyes, did you instantly know it was the same creature? Did it take you back to that moment? What were your feelings in that moment right then?
I think there was a moment inside me that was like, I know you. Whether or not I admitted it to myself, because I remember a little later on being like, those eyes, I remember those eyes, I don't know why it didn't dawn on me all of a sudden to be like, it's you. But I do feel that there was this sense, because the way it looked up at me with intention, it was the same way it was looking at me when this head came out of my bedroom. It was locked in, and I hate to say it like this, but it knew me. That's how it felt. It felt like, hello, old friend, but it obviously not a friend.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that feeling, because when I had mine, it's like I see you, and it was an instant like this thing knows who I am, like it knows me, right? And my encounter started with UFO, Bigfoot, ended with the Dogman, but I think they're all connected somehow, and there's that connection there. But I think they know if you're a child of God. I think they do that, and I think that that's maybe why some people see them, some people don't. That maybe that's what's going on. But it's such a strange world that we live in, and I'm glad that you've been able to overcome that fear and still there. But obviously, you're able to live your life and go on with what you need to go on with. There's always somebody listening to this podcast that has a story that they're sitting on, and they're just afraid to talk about it. They don't know what to do, how to say it. What advice, coming forward like you have and talking about it, what advice would you give them if they're listening, they're on the fence of whether they should share or not?
Well, I think first, my first bit of advice would be, whether you've had just one encounter or you've had a lifetime encounter, I think the first thing you need to do is bring it to God. If you don't have a relationship with God, I would get one. But I would bring it to God and ask him your questions, all your whats and your whys of what you saw and why you, and get it out. He can handle it. I've done it. And especially if you're really struggling, because I 100% believe that God has a purpose for everything in our lives, even if it hurts us or scares us, or doesn't feel fair. Why me? Why did I see this? Why did I encounter that? I believe it's in these encounters and in these times that God is trying to get your attention. I think he is trying to speak to you, to draw you in closer to him, so that you are dependent on him and not the fear that you're feeling. And I guess too, obviously, once you have found peace with God in what you saw, then share it with those who are of like mind, to help yourself and others realize that this trauma doesn't need to be permanent. You don't need to be paralyzed by it. And you don't have to have the answers. We serve a God who has the answers. So we don't have to bear that burden of proof. And we know that God has overcome the world, and that includes Bigfoot, Dogman, ghosts, whatever. So that would be my advice.
There's a lot of debate in the Bigfoot world, in the cryptid community, about what these things are, if they are flesh and blood or that they're more than that. And no matter what side of the fence you lean on, you have to admit that it's full of strangeness and things we don't understand. And I'm never going to claim to know, to tell you that I know everything, because there's no way I can. But what I do know is these encounters affect people deeply, and they are absolutely life-changing. And I'm honored to sit behind this desk and this mic and listen to people's encounters and help them through that trauma. And if that's you tonight, and you've had an encounter and you're looking for a place to share it, you can always share it here at Mysteries Unknown. I'm so grateful for the platform that I'm allowed to have. And I hope that these stories resonate with you, and I hope that they're helping people heal from these encounters. And if you've had one, trust me, you can always email me. My email is mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. From somebody who's experienced these things and have had several encounters over the years, there is something to the fact that you are marked, tagged, whatever word you want to use. And I don't understand why that is yet, and maybe I never will. But we're going to continue to search for answers. We're going to continue to get these episodes out every single Monday. There's a new episode that drops. And Thursdays we have these live shows. And also, too, if you want to support the channel, consider being a member. It helps so much, and it helps me to keep these things going. But I appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the support. After that episode, you know exactly what I'm going to say. It's the most important thing any of us can do. Stay prayed up, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.